Bam! What is going on, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I am here every single Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time to talk about a topic. They tend to be ones I enjoy, and the people that watch it tend to give me feedback that they enjoy it as well. So, first off, what is up, Jesse? Yarn Saxa, good to see you. We are streaming. My man Jamie up in Canada, what up? We are streaming on the Master Chim official YouTube page, also a couple of different Facebook pages. And do we call it Twitter now? Is it X? What's up, Aaron? Lori! What's up, Lori? Good to see you. Haven't seen you in a minute. Hope all is well. Tell my man Oscar I said what up. All right. So let's get down to business. Well, first, I guess we'll start with the housekeeping, as it's referred to on these things. MasterChim.com. Go there. That's my website. You can get on my email list. It is free. In order to get on the email list, you have to give me your email. Well, when you do, I give you a promo code for a free program. The program, Master the 24-Hour Cycle, is usually, and still, for those who can't read, I guess, on the site, it is usually $47. You get that $47 program absolutely free just for signing up for the email list. I think the people who still buy the program are just trying to, I guess, actively support, my work, because it literally says all over the website, pretty much like, don't pay for this. Just get on the email list. You get a promo code. But I digress. Whatever. I appreciate it either way. All right. So let's get into it. And all the other relevant links are in the descriptions, yada, yada, yada. So let's get into it. The topic of today's video. And I do implore those that are watching that may have some questions or comments to please do so we could address them directly. Why you can't take the pressure. Okay. Why you can't take the pressure. There's a point where as you engage friction in life, and this is the sort of semantic categorization of these, factors in one's life I've assigned these terms to. Sometimes I start saying a sentence and I don't know what I'm saying halfway through it. That last sentence was sort of like that. I think I said it correctly. But basically, I have a collection of words that I use to describe things that we all deal with. And I need these words so I could plug them into formulas and compare them, et cetera, et cetera. Just being alive, we are almost struggling, fighting, working, exerting force, moving, we could say, to keep our identity present, to keep our existence present. If you just lay down somewhere and don't eat, sleep, drink, whatever, eventually you will not only die, but you will sort of degrade and, from ashes to ashes, whatever the saying is. That being an extreme example. Basically, if we're somebody who wants to be alive, we got some stuff to do. And as we interact with our environment, there is an inherent amount of friction that we engage. Now, friction is not, conflict like we would assign conflict with people or, you broke your leg, and friction is really sometimes the door is a little bit harder than others to push open. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to open a jar of something. Sometimes your car is right outside the building. Sometimes you got to walk 2 blocks to get to it. There's all these different things that we have to do that create friction in our life. Now, that friction can escalate to the point where it becomes an obstacle. An obstacle presents itself as something that it's almost a scale of friction to where it becomes something that we can avoid. but something that if we do not traverse, we do not get to continue down the path that the obstacle laid itself upon. It's difficult to squat 300 pounds, 315, right? Weightlifters, you know what I'm talking about. It's difficult to squat 315. Squatting 315 may then present itself as an obstacle, and some people may not be willing to do the work to get beyond that in their squat. To draw an easy example. But the weight is the weight, right? And that weight, the resistance that the weight provides, gravity, etc., that falls under the category of friction in this particular case. Add enough weight, that friction becomes an obstacle. In order to traverse that obstacle, we tend to have to do things that are different than the things that led up to the obstacle. If what we were doing up until that point was good enough to traverse the obstacle, it kind of makes the argument that the obstacle wouldn't have revealed itself in the first place, right? If I could squat 500 pounds and I go up to 315, I could squat 500. 315 is not going to present itself as an obstacle. It's friction. It's still heavy. By the way, whether you squat 315 or you squat 500 pounds, it always feels like 315 pounds. It's just that that is a relative feeling depending on who it is that's doing the lifting. When we engage struggle, whereby we work with our friction to pursue our missions, and on the path of pursuing those missions, at times we have these frictions that sort of scale themselves up to the point where they could become obstacles. Maybe the friction sort of just scales to the point where we're struggling, but we're still moving. The obstacle represents that point where we can't move anymore. We have to become more. We have to do something differently at a minimum. But if we're somebody who engages struggle, that struggle, because of the increase in strength that we need to maintain movement, will constantly be reducing the struggle relative to how strong we are to just friction. If I am I went on a hike the other day. If I'm hiking in the woods and I have some elevation to deal with, right? Got to walk up the hill, rocks, roots, all these different things. They're a major pain in the ass when you're going on hikes. But if I'm doing this every day, as I have been, lately, there's a point where my body becomes acclimated, right? A phrase in that little niche they use is you get your trail legs, they call it. And when that happens, the elevation's the same. The number of rocks are the same. The gait of my walking is still relatively the same. It's just that it is not as much of a struggle for me to do it. I have become more acclimated. I have adapted to it. So what was once maybe a struggle now has just become friction. Still got to do the work, but it's just friction. Cherrytown Vibe, what up? Corey, what up? So when I am looking at, people who can't take pressure, the first thing I'm going to say is, well, it's relative. They're basically at a point where they no longer know how to maintain the movement in the current situation they're in. Figuratively, movement. They don't understand how to continue to be them. Remember, when I define the term self-power, I talk about an individual's ability to maintain the integrity of who he is, despite the level of intensity and conflict that his ecosystem represents. When I was a teenager, I was locked up for 2 months, right? Got in trouble, being a bit of an asshole, and got locked up. And when I got locked up, it was a struggle to maintain who I was in this environment that was entirely different than when one is not being locked up, right? I'm walking down the block in my neighborhood as a 15, 16-year-old. Like, I have a certain amount security and the certainty that I can expect being in my neighborhood. When I was put into, the jail, now it's none of these things are certain anymore. I don't have that level of expectation in my environment. There's too many unknowns. It's going to be difficult to maintain who I am because who I am used to, coming up against in terms of friction is completely on its head. It's completely different. I don't know if I could be the guy who's walking as proudly through the neighborhood as I walk through the jail. If I do that, there's going to be a different level of friction that's connected to that. And when that happens, I had to ask myself, okay, well, do I succumb to that pressure and be a little bit less of who I am so I don't have that level of intensity? Or do I rise to the level of the ecosystem and do what's necessary to continue to maintain who I am? And to be honest, it was a little bit of both. It was a little bit of both. I think as, I've coached martial artists, men primarily, for over 20 years. And when you teach martial arts, you get to learn a lot about people. You get to learn about who they are when there's no pressure. And then you get to reveal who they are with pressure. And you get to see the gap between the two of them. Now, very typical. I myself, I can't say at the highest levels of pressure, I'm going to be acting like this. I train every day to try to make that the case. But I can't sit here and talk about some situation maybe I've never been in that's going to pressure me more than I've ever been pressured. And it's just going to be a walk in the park. I'm going to be cracking jokes and being me the whole time. That's the plan. That's the training. But until that actually happens, I have as much uncertainty about that as anybody. That being said, there are some people when faced with pressure, and this is through the lens and the experience of having run a martial arts school to illustrate this point, to illustrate this sort of spectrum of reactions to pressure. Some guys, they get the pressure and they relent immediately. They become submissive, passive. They don't want to walk into the obstacle anymore. So they're saying, oh, I'm good here. And they tend to set up camp right in front of the obstacle without ever doing the work necessary to traverse it. It's the guy who, in the martial arts claims to be, having fun, claims to be, just there to exercise or whatever it is. And listen, I'm not even saying that can't be the case, but most often, in my experience, it's the person who got a taste of the pressure and didn't want to do it anymore. I remember having one student, I really liked this guy too, really cool dude, expressed to me that he wanted to do MMA. So we were doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu primarily, gi, no gi. If you don't know what that means, it doesn't really matter. But we were doing grappling, and he was like, hey, I want to start training to fight. I want to do a fight. Well, the saying I've had in my school for 20 years is if you want to fight, I want you to fight. So I invited him to my MMA program. And when he had to show up to the MMA program, he was introduced to what the difference was between training for grappling and jiu-jitsu and training for a fight. And he never showed up to another one of those again. He and I never had a conversation about it. It was, it's one of those things where it was understood. It's like, yeah, he didn't want this type of pressure. Again, it's no value judgment. Different strokes, different folks, that whole thing. But I understood he couldn't take the pressure that class provided. And I think he realized it as well. And I think, I'd actually give him credit for being honest with himself and saying, yeah, this isn't for me. There are times where the guy will, the guys who can't take the pressure, they will just say, hey, I'm good. No need to go any further. Another reaction you get from people another, I would say, bad reaction you get from people is they become emotional. And it's the emotion that enhances their drive to be able to traverse the obstacle. They have to be angry to fight hard. They have to be angry to finish the cardio workout. They have to be emotional in order to pull more of their potential to the surface and become functional. Those people, they wind up getting better at doing the thing before they get better at not running on emotion. See, the thing is, when you run on emotion, whether it's anger, fear, jealousy, whatever emotions could motivate somebody to do something that they otherwise wouldn't, that type of fuel does not burn clean. That type of fuel has a toxic interaction with a person's relationship with the thing. You don't want to have to be angry. I remember at times I would play like classical music or Frank Sinatra or reggae or something that was not fighter-like, while everybody was sparring. And the guys would always be giving me shit, and I would always respond to them. Why is it that you need to be angry in order to train? We don't want to build these relationships, with emotion, embedded in them. We shouldn't have to have angry, cursing, yelling, just angry type music playing in order for us to train hard. Yeah, but if I put the music, my energy goes all the way up. Well, what happens when it goes all the way up is as soon as that music dissipates, it starts to go down. Now you have to decline. Where's skill? We're really capable, really incapable. Where does skill play a role in that? We want to be even. We want our energy to burn clean, because then we get a better insight as to what our capabilities actually are. So you would have the individual that faces the obstacle in the form of pressure, and they say, hey, I'm good. Then you have the other people that they face that obstacle and they get angry. They got to turn green. They turn green, they get angry, and that helps them traverse the obstacle. We have other people that they try their best to best the obstacle. They try their best to traverse the obstacle, and it doesn't work. And they don't have any sort of introspective process. As soon as they're unable of getting past the obstacle, as soon as they're unable to get past a level of pressure, the process isn't internal, it's an external process. They start saying, well, this is why I can't do this. As if, the argument really amounts to, the only reason I can't, beat this level of pressure or exist in this level of pressure is because there's too much pressure in it. It's like, what? I get blamed a lot for being a difficult, instructor, a difficult coach. And I am. I have no apologies. But there are people who will criticize my level of instruction as the reason why they couldn't get past a certain obstacle. And that's just not the case. Because I look at so many other people that didn't have these problems. How come they could do it and you didn't? It's because those other people tend to usually have an internal process. When they face this amount of pressure, they don't say, why is this pressure so pressurized? They usually say, what do I have to do? What do I have to change? Who do I need to become? What do I need to model? What winning formulas, right? Do I need to model? Those are the questions that they start asking themselves. The process for gaining past a certain level of pressure is an internal one. It's introspective. The individual evolves. When somebody's having a difficult time maintaining the integrity of his identity at a certain level of pressure, and they come to me and say, well, how come I can't do this? How do I get past it? The first thing I want to know is, what are your rituals? What do you mean? What do you do repetitively by design? I don't have any rituals. Well, no. Your rituals are whatever you do every day. Who you are is the culmination of all of the rituals you have invested in yourself up until this point. Now, if those rituals up until this conversation have never been actually articulated consciously, That's your fucking problem. But you are the product of the things you've been doing. So what are some of the things that I'll look at my house, the way I raise my kids? When I bought this house 6 years ago, it's got a central air system. It needed to be serviced. Hasn't been on since I've owned the house. It gets fucking hot in this house in the summer. My wife does not like that we don't have air conditioning. And I feel for her, I do. But we have 4 children that need to build a relationship with pressure. We have 4 children that need to build a relationship with discomfort. I know for certain that I get this air conditioning popping over a certain amount of degrees outside. Everybody's inside trying to be on their devices, trying to just hide from the heat. And I don't want to create a scenario whereby I have to constantly be over them, go outside, go outside, go outside, go outside. So what do? I just don't have air conditioning, and they find their way to go outside as it is, because on those hot days, it's cooler outside than it is in the house. This is ritualized pressure, a ritualized relationship with pressure. All of my kids exercise. They exercise because it's on their chore list. All my kids have chores every day. Exercising every day isn't something that they're sort of forced to do to fix a problem, or, hey, if you're not, organically, keeping yourself in shape, then we're going to have to do this exercise. Like, no, from the earliest memories they had, every day, part of their chores, okay, throw out the garbage, walk the dog, 100 squats, it's just part of what they do. They don't know any differently. So when people have an issue with pressure, the first thing I want to know, what are the rituals? What rituals do you have to normalize the level of pressure that currently is presenting itself as an obstacle? Somebody doesn't know how to swim. I don't care about all the techniques and all the hacks and all the strategies. As in terms of priority, number one, get in the fucking water. Get used to being in the water. Build a relationship with the sensation of the water around your body. Because what that relationship does is it allows you to not have to be hypervigilant. When we are learning how to drive, the first thing we are is hypervigilant. We're looking at every single thing that we need to do while driving. After time, however, we don't need to recruit as much of our conscious bandwidth to those activities because we become so related to it, right? We build that relationship with it, and so much of it is chunked into our subconscious. We don't have to think about it anymore. So what winds up happening when somebody's in pressure is that there are components of that pressure, if they're finding themselves not able to coexist with that pressure, there are components of that pressure that is recruiting the entirety of their bandwidth, and they're paying attention to less than needs to be paid attention to if that's the formula they're going to run. Meaning, because they're trying to pay attention to everything that's involved with this pressure, if there's more to pay attention to than they're capable of, it's a problem. They're not going to make it. And that's where they're repelled. So the idea is to be able to normalize, build a relationship with the components of what this pressure is, so much less of our conscious mind is recruited by it. I have a high pain tolerance, a high physical pain tolerance. Why do I have a high physical pain tolerance? Because I have physically been in pain more than most people in my life. Playing sports, I was one of those rough and tumble kids. I'm the kid that broke his leg, his arm. I have scars all over my face, my head, my body. When I, am doing jujitsu, and those of you guys that train grappling, you can relate to this. You're getting that kick in the head, you're biting your lip, all these little just bumps and bruises that's inherent in, some of these more intense, roles. Like, there's a certain point where we just ignore it. But take somebody who hasn't built a relationship with that environment and put them in the same thing, and they're getting offended. One of the things that, to this example, another iteration of it that I think has value, you look at high-level competitors I'll use Gordon Ryan as an example. Gordon Ryan, if you don't know who he is, best grappler on the planet right now. And there was a match he had with Cyborg Abreu. Cyborg Abreu, Brazilian, black belt, very, very accomplished competitor. Had a match with Gordon, was getting very frustrated. And in the match with Gordon, started getting very, slappy. It is acceptable in grappling, to move and position the head and sort of snap the head's position in different ways. And it's not acceptable to literally just start slapping people. But that's exactly what Cyborg was doing. But at no point did Gordon even react. He didn't care. It wasn't relevant. He was winning the grappling game. So why would he play the slapping game? Cyborg, and I'm not saying, I never met Cyborg. He seems like a pretty decent dude. He's done a lot of good stuff for a bunch of people. But in that situation, he got emotional. And he was trying to divert the scenario into something else other than what he was losing currently, or at least the thing that he was getting frustrated by. Gordon Ryan didn't even pay attention to it. There's a certain point where when we build relationships with certain levels of intensity, it doesn't bother us. We know we're good. We know we're good. So why you can't take the pressure? You don't take the pressure. You can't take the pressure because you've never built a relationship with the pressure includes. I look at your rituals, and your rituals are nothing but a collection of either moving away from the things that pressure you or blaming everybody else for you not being able to exist with it. There's a certain point where if you want to get better at anything, there's going to be a level of difficulty, a level of intensity. I like, the metaphor of heat. And you have to ask yourself, what is the temperature that you start melting at? What is the temperature that you start becoming less of you? I got jumped one time in my life, right? I told this story before. I was in Edenwald Projects, going to a hooky party, and I had one of my classmates with me. And this is one of my classmates, one of my buddies. It was like a scene out of like a bad Little Rascals skit. This whole group of, ne'er-do-wells turned the corner as me and my buddy are walking down the road. And we have that sort of interaction. Who are you guys? Whatever. Next thing I know, I get hit, from the back. I turtle up and I'm getting kicked, punched. At some point, I look up to see where my buddy is to make sure he's okay. This motherfucker's halfway down the block running. And I just see his back. He's not even looking back. So I'm like, motherfucker. And what allowed me to get away was a couple of them tried to pick up a refrigerator that happened to be like in the garbage. It's an Edenwald Projects in the Bronx. There was a bunch of garbage that was getting ready to get picked up, whatever. One of the things was a refrigerator. They tried to pick it up. They're going to try and throw a fucking refrigerator on me. I wound up getting up and fucking jetting. I was fast as fuck when I was younger, and I was out of there. Well, this is the thing. My buddy was fine right up until we got to that level of heat. And then he melted into a nothing. Turns out I wasn't friends with a little nothing. I was friends with this thing that was actually fraudulent. He presented himself as being somebody. And sometimes we make the mistake of assuming they're going to be that person no matter the level of heat. I pride myself on having relationships with respectable people that go back 20, 30 years. And these people I can call and they'll do anything for me. And these are respectable, accomplished people. But I've conducted myself in a way that all these years later, I can go back and call them and they'd be willing to maintain that alliance and help me in any way that I needed because I've never melted in the face of pressure with them. I've never let them down. I've never had these relationships of convenience. Now, mind you, I certainly have been the architect of pressure in relationships that wound up melting the people that I was connected to. Guilty as charged and proudly But again, I pride myself on being able to maintain these relationships over time, that no amount of pressure can change who I am. If I'm with somebody somewhere publicly, to bust the chops of my former classmate that bailed on me, same type of scenario. If I'm with somebody and we're about to get jumped and potentially killed, like, there's a good chance I'm dying because I'm not leaving. No matter what would happen to me in that fight, it would pale in comparison to what I could imagine would be going through my head if I left one of my friends when they needed it. How the fuck could I live with myself then? I'd rather take a beating one day than take a beating every day of my life from there on in. But that's what having a functional relationship with pressure is. You do some of the thinking beforehand. You ask yourself, okay, I'm at this crossroads. There are other options. The one that I'm looking to take, am I taking it because it is more in line with who I am, is more in line with mission? Or am I taking this detour because it represents less pressure than the road that I'm on? My advice would be never take a detour because there's less pressure. What's the incentive to become more if that's the way that you handle these interactions with obstacles in your life? If I'm somebody who is looking to build the highest levels of self-power, that means I need to seek out the highest levels of pressure. I can't take on so much pressure that I'm going to break, right? So there's a difference between the type of pressure that builds an individual and the type of pressure that becomes an enemy that looks to destroy an individual, right? And I use that terminology in a universal sense. I could squat 500 pounds, right? Right now, 500 pounds on the bar, I'll get under it and I'll squat that motherfucker. Without a little bit of warm up, I might not be doing much for the rest of the day, but I'm strong enough to do that. Put 800 pounds on. That 800 pounds at my current level of strength is an enemy to my body. I go to try to squat 800 pounds right now, I'm going to get fucking stapled. So there's a certain level of pressure where it is no longer the thing that is pushing you to become more. There's a certain level of pressure where it's too much, you wind up getting destroyed. A phrase that I've used before in a different context is, when we fight our enemies, we train them. When we fight our enemies, we train them. What does that mean in the context of what we're talking about? If we have pressure and we are battling this pressure in this environment, it is attempting to train us if we look at it in that way. If it was too much pressure, we would be dead. Nietzsche, good old Freddie, he said, whatever doesn't kill you makes us stronger. Well, that is exactly the paradigm that I'm describing. That's the dynamic between pressure and one's reaction to it in the form of development. We become more when we're pressured. And it's not like we become more and then we reach a level where we're good and then the pressure could stop and we're good right there. No. There's an erosion that occurs. Remember in the beginning of this talk, I talked about, our identity, we have to fight for the friction, the movement that's required. That's inherent in just being alive. So there is no pressing the pause button because there is no, I'm going to stay right here and I'll be good. No, the erosion is always happening. The universe is always fighting for its own success. When I look at where an individual is, when he's facing an obstacle that he has obligated himself to, he has created an oath toward, and he balks because of a level of pressure, that is what cowards do. So what is this? Does that mean people who can't deal with pressure are cowards? No. Understand the condition that I laid out in the beginning. If you are, I'm going to get a little simple here, right? If you are a pussy, don't talk like you're not a pussy. If you are stupid, Don't obligate yourself to things that are beyond your capabilities. Congruence is what I'm advocating for here. This is almost an aside to what I've been talking about, because sure, I can understand how somebody doesn't have the ability to deal with a certain level of pressure. I can give him some sort of synopsis or plan or protocol to how to remedy that and build, his resilience over time to the point where that pressure is no longer as damaging as it is right now. But as an aside, if you can't be about it, don't talk about it. Right? Use a martial arts school example again. I remember, in the martial arts, I used to have a mastermind group for martial arts school owners. And a very common thing that I would be exposed to with these schools, both in my group and in the industry at large, was this idea that we're a family. We're a family. And I always took issue with that. It's like, okay, so $200 and I'm your brother. If I promise to pay you $200 a month, I could be your brother, and all of the obligations that brotherhood, requires, I'm going to be privy to that for $200 a month. Obviously, that wasn't the case. So I just said, it's not that you can't become a family. It's just that it's bullshit to say that just joining it is. There's a point where if we want to actually be about something, we have to make sure we understand what it entails before we obligate ourselves to it, before we give some sort of an oath for it. If you're an individual who wants the reputation as being a stand-up individual, as being somebody who honors his word, somebody who is a worthwhile investment by other people, then you have to conduct yourself as that. I am so almost paranoid when it comes to obligating myself to things that I can't do, obligating myself to things that I won't do just because of the benefit that I get from the obligation itself. I'm going to do this for you. Therefore, you should give me that reward. And I do that in bad faith. Or I do that saying, oh, well, I'll figure it out along the way. We got to be careful with that. We got to be careful of having an approach to life whereby our alliances follow a formula of get as much out of it as you can before they figure out that we're full of shit. It's not that it's going to destroy you. I would say even more tragically, it may not destroy you. It may just design a life whereby you are constantly hanging around people who are just as selfish as you, all of you agreeing to make believe you give a fuck about one another. That's what happens when you build a culture that's not based on pressure. I appreciate you guys. I'm going to end it there. I think that was a good talk. You guys that are commenting and giving me the likes and everything, man, I appreciate it. Damien, what's up? It's my brother there. What's up, bro? I appreciate you guys. I'll be here next Wednesday, same time. Make sure you like, subscribe, and all that stuff. I really, really enjoy, these talks, and I hope you guys too. See you next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.